I welcome you to the Public Square. I'm Wayne Shepard here with the team, which I'll introduce in a moment. But I tell you what, we've been talking about a very important topic for a number of days now, and finally we come to the studio because this is something we need to talk about. Dave Zanotti is here, of course, Alan C. Duncan, our producer, Rob Walgate, Jeff Sanders, Melanie Elsie will be joined by a guest later. But Dave, this is something we've got to talk about.
It is, Wayne, and the subject has been around for a long time. It's been around in our 44 years of experience. This is at least the fourth time that we've seen a rise of the discussion. It's had different words over the years. For the purpose of today's broadcast, we're going to start with the title of Christian Nationalism, Is It Real? But I want to tell you as a matter of history that back, I can remember in the early 80s, it was a discussion about Reconstructionism, and then it became a discussion about Dominionism. And then it is. There's been so many different names given to these discussions, and now we're up to this question of Christian nationalism. So it's something that's being heard a lot. Now, I would be dishonest not to say that it seems to coincidentally arise from critics in the media on the left who seem to only be vibrantly concerned about this at the eve of a large national election. All right, it just seems like, and that's kind of historically where it's come from, and whether we're talking about people talking about theocracy again, or dominionism, or Reconstructionism, or Restorationism, or now Christian nationalism. Well, what triggered this for us was a portal of entry in a interview that happened on MSNBC with a very well-known reporter by the name of Heidi Przybyla. Now, to be fair, Ms. Przybyla is not here to defend herself, but she was invited. And she did, in fact, respond to our invitation with simply not giving us any single word. She just sent us an article link that she had written after this event. So we have heard from her, but only in the sense that she sent us a link to another article, which we will cover down the road. But to be fair, because she's not here to defend herself, what she's speaking, she's spoken in public. We've given her an opportunity to participate in this conversation, which she has declined. So let's go back to MSNBC and let's go back to a discussion. And again, this is constructed around the presidential election and around the subject of Donald Trump. The subject of Donald Trump is irrelevant to us in this conversation. This is a conversation about what is Christian nationalism. Mm-hmm. So let's start with Heidi Przybyla's remarks on MSNBC that really opened the portal to this conversation.
These are groups that you should get very schooled on because they have a lot of power in Trump's circle. And the one thing that unites all of them, because there's many different groups orbiting Trump, but the thing that unites them as Christian nationalists, not Christians, by the way, because Christian nationalist is very different, is that they believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God. The problem with that is that they are determining men, there it is, men, are determining what God is telling them. And in the past, that so-called natural law is, it's a pillar of Catholicism. Catholicism, for instance, it's been used for good in social justice campaigns. Right. Martin Luther King evoked it in talking about civil rights. But now you have an extremist element of conservative Christians who say that this applies specifically to issues including abortion, gay marriage, and it's going much further than that.
Let's repeat and restate what we heard. What Heidi Przybyla is telling us is that the definition of a Christian nationalist is someone who believes that their rights come from God. And that she said it with her own words. And as opposed to their rights coming from the Congress or or from man or from the courts, that they believe their rights come from God. Now, as you can imagine, anyone that's familiar with this broadcast is going to recognize we're going to be all pretty quick to
I think so,
jump in on that one, since the most frequently quoted passage of any document that we have when we go out and about in the marketplace is the Declaration of Independence, which makes it quite clear we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. So, if in fact Ms. Przybyla is correct in her analysis, then in essence, Thomas Jefferson and the committee of 5 people that wrote the Declaration of Independence, as well as all of the original 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, are clearly, or were clearly, Christian nationalists. And in essence, the premise of the Declaration of Independence is purely Christian nationalism. And therefore, it ceases to be any longer a distinctive. So this is the problem that these remarks set up. Now, there's a secondary problem, and that is that Ms. Przybyla, when she was approached on this from multiple sources, she said that her remarks were taken out of context. And that, in fact, what she was trying to say was it's the problem that these men, and you remember how she, and it is men, she said,
yes,
right,
yeah,
men, are actually trying to base their public policy approaches and strategies based upon this premise that their rights come from God. That's the problem, that they're actually trying to take this theory and apply it in the construction of civil law. Well, again, I would beg to say, where exactly did you think the people who started America, what did you think they were trying to do? I mean, the whole thing is so dramatically disconnected from history that it's actually a bit embarrassing. And I think that what happened pretty quickly was Ms. Przybyla found herself to be pretty remarkably embarrassed because a whole lot of people said, she said, what?
Shouldn't that discussion have taken place on the show, though? It shouldn't have been able to be aired and no one raised the question right away and said, wait a minute here. We've all studied history. We've all taken a look. What are you saying?
Well, and Michael Steele, the former chairman of the Republican National Party, was right there listening to the conversation live on MSNBC and said nothing.
Right.
You know, I would like to just do a survey of all of America's past presidents, and some whom I would imagine she would have liked a lot, like maybe Harry Truman, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Jimmy Carter, whatever, and see how many of them quote with approval the Declaration of Independence and say that our rights come from God. Were they Christian nationalists also?
Well, Jeff, since you bring that up, I mean, I went and found a statement that President Biden made at the Democratic Convention back in 2020, in which he cited the Declaration and in essence made the same statement that we're making, that in fact the Declaration and our rights come from God. So does that make Joe Biden a Christian nationalist?
That's what he is.
This is where the question came. So before we bring in our special guest, and I need to pre-announce our special guest, Melanie, I'm going to give you an opportunity here. It looks like you were winding up with something to say.
Well, I just think she covered all 3 branches of government when she said our rights come from the Supreme Court and the regulatory process and the legislature. I mean, she's implying that our rights only come from men who generate through these 3 branches. That's a scary thought. That to me is frightening based on what we're seeing now with rights being taken away.
Well, so the ramifications of this, but once again, I would remind you, Ms. Elsey, that you are trying to take your beliefs and apply them to public policy. And that clearly is what Ms. Przybyla was saying is the problem, even though you're not a man. You're doing what she said we're not supposed to do with this concept. All right, so we've got a problem here. But the problem is, and the first level entry of the problem is, she said, what? That's completely anti-historical. And unfortunately, it's also anti-American. If the Declaration of Independence truly defines what America is, that's a clear problem. But there are bigger problems entailed with this that we've got to get to. So what we're going to do is we've asked, so that I could actually behave myself in this broadcast, we had to bring in the most grown-up member of our Board of Trustees, Dr. William B. Allen, who, as you know, is an accomplished author for many, many years and just has recently released a book we've talked about on the Public Square, which I have spent a lot of days in the last few days preparing for this broadcast. His translation and commentary of Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws. And Dr. Allen is an eminent political philosopher. He understands the founding. He understands the generations prior to the founding. He understands ancient civilizations and governments and philosophies. And so we brought the big grown-up in and the most accomplished author in to sort of keep me from completely losing it and becoming all Italian all over everybody. Because when people start to mess with the Declaration of Independence, I feel like they're trying to do heart surgery on what America really is. And I have a problem with that. So we're going to bring Dr. Allen in, and this conversation is going to continue.
Okay, he's been listening and he's ready, but we'll get to him right after this break. You are listening to The Public Square, and this program is called Christian Nationalism. Is it real? It's going to continue, and it is going to get very real. The conversation will get very real coming up, so you stay with us.
Introducing the latest program from the Public Square.
Kids on the Square.
We at Kids on the Square are dedicated to helping teach the next generation through topics like Bible stories, scientific marvels, and American history. We want to equip parents with fun and free educational resources to share the truth with their children. Won't you join us? New episodes are released monthly. You can listen wherever podcasts are available and visit kidsonthesquare.com to find out more. Thank you, and
welcome to Kids on the Square.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
Back with you on the Public Square in this week's edition, and Dave announced that our guest is Dr. William B. Allen. So, Dr. Allen, I'll be the first to say welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, and it's a delight to be with you again.
You were listening when Dave opened the program a moment ago. You want to give an initial reaction, and then we'll dig a little deeper?
My first reaction is in total sympathy with the impulsive reaction that Dave described. What? What are you saying? Are you talking about America? That would be the normal reaction for anybody who's at all familiar with this country's heritage. But there are some underlying factors here that we really need to pause and think about, because Priscilla is not merely wrong with respect to our history, but she's also in the company of people who believe quite differently than she, who are wrong about today, as well as about the past, and about how we should understand our relationship to government. I remember that Dave once said, this land has one governing or sovereign authority, and it's called we the people. But of course, when he said that, he was remembering that the people stand on a foundation. They don't stand on their own. They're not isolated individuals. And the foundation they stand on is what's laid out in the Declaration of Independence. So that to be subject to the authority of principles that are the result of endowment by our Creator, so the laws of nature and of nature's God, is fundamental in understanding how the people come to be a people. They're not a people because the government creates the people. No government creates a people. People create the government. And you have to keep that relationship in that order in order to appreciate the error involved in Priscilla's analysis. So let me boil it down to a single statement that is often present in discussions of political philosophy. It's a simple question. When it comes to morality, justice, virtue, right and wrong, do we discover the things that are just, right, wrong, and virtuous only when somebody in authority tells us they are? Or are there principles of justice, right, wrong, and virtue before anybody tells us that they are? And Priscilla is saying it's only when the government tells us something is right that it's a right, and therefore can become a right of ours. But if that's the case, that means we are only creatures of the government. Our entire existence is secular. There's nothing sacred about it.
Our entire existence is secular.
Yeah,
I think we need to let's get that highlighter out right there, because when Dr. Allen's talking, everybody gets notes, okay? Everybody takes notes. Our entire existence is secular. Okay. Doc, expound on that.
Well, let me put it to you this way. Tony Perkins reacted to Priscilla. He demanded an apology on behalf of Christians for her statement.
Speaking for the Family Research Council, right? And
Speaking for Family Research, and I think he was entirely misplaced on that. And in fact, he asked me a question in email. He says, William, how can the founding principles of a nation ever be a threat to it unless those in positions of power sought to radically reorder society? So how can the founding principles ever be a threat to a nation? Which says, in effect, that it is the nation in itself that is the bearer of the principles. But that's false. The principles pre-exist the nation. The nation may be founded on principles, but they're not the nation's principles. They're the principles that are over and above the nation. That is why they are sacred. And so that it's always the case that a nation can become a threat to fundamental principles simply by abandoning the sacred, simply by turning away from principles. And we saw this already at the beginning with Rome. Rome had this advantageous situation of Christianity being introduced by Constantine. And Constantine therefore sought to make Christianity the basis of politics in Rome. And he did that with some expectation of creating the kind of relationship Priscilla has in mind, where you can't tell the difference between the religion and the politics. But within 1.5 generations, his grandson Julian was rejecting that formulation, accusing Christ of being an atheist because Christ denied the polytheistic gods that previously existed, trying to spare Rome from what seemed to be looming, which is Rome's fall. And guess what? Julian failed. Rome fell. Rome, the nation, the political society, fell. But Christianity did not fall with it. Christianity thrived after Rome fell. The barbarian hordes invaded Rome and destroyed Roman politics, and they became Christians. There is a complete separation between faith and politics at the highest level, the level of the sacred. And therefore, to say that a people who have faith can live on the basis of something other than faith that they can abstract from or pretend that their faith has no relevance is itself a manifest contradiction in terms and an impossibility for any human life that seriously pursues what is sacred. So that Tony Perkins also, by saying Christians have to be defended politically, is forgetting that their defense is not political. It is an appeal to the sacred. It is defense of faith.
Doc, let me press on this a little bit. And when I read the words of the founders, and it starts with, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Yes. The truths are what is sacred, correct?
Yes.
These truths to be self-evident.
Sacred and self-evident. By self-evident, it means the truth is contained within the statement itself. It doesn't need a proof or a demonstration.
And there's also a sense, is there also a sense in that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that they are in fact contained within themselves, and that we hold them is a sense of a universal embrace of them, that there's a consensus?
Yes.
Okay. So this is where we started with the declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that there's a confession of a self-evident sacred truth that there is a God, we are not him. They call him creator. He is not us. We are the creature. He is the creation. And is by his action of agency, he has placed within us certain unalienable rights. He put them there. Government did not put them there.
Place rights in a certain awareness. Ever since the fall, when human beings began to try to separate themselves from God and therefore fell into the pattern of human misery that results from separation from God, we've been going back and forth on this question. Is there a human life separate from God? And the answer has been no. And it took the revelation of Christ to make that answer emphatic and final. There is no separation from God. How much do we know there is no separation from God? Because even though we willfully insist on trying to maintain such a separation, completely secularizing our existence, Christ died to relieve us from our sinfulness, from our tendency to slip into the pattern of separation, so that we always will have, all human beings, doesn't matter whether they're Christians or not, all human beings will live under the authority of the sacrifice of Christ.
Sorry, guys, he did it to me.
What do you say to that? How do you follow up with an encore?
Okay, that's all the time we have.
Yeah, it's okay.
That's the final word.
Okay. Doc, one of the interesting things attending this conversation has been the fact that there are at least now about 7 definitions that we've been able to pick up from the pile-on that happened once Heidi Prisbilla started. There are articles have been printed all across the board. There was a big article yesterday in the Atlantic. There's articles in the Times and the Post, NPR, and it's funny because all of a sudden all the new authors come out of the woodwork. They've come out with a book they've just been waiting to release, and oh look, here it is on Christian nationalism. But they seem to be totally unable to come up with a uniform definition on what is it. I mean, the definitions are scattered all across the board. Heidi Prisbilla made her attempt at a definition. There have been others that have said, Christian nationalism is simply the privileged attitude of white Christians. And there's been at least several other definitions. You've seen this probably your whole life. What do you think about all this word salad about what are we talking about here?
Well, I think the word salad actually begins not with the attribution from these people who are critically referring to Christian nationalism. It begins with the people who are calling themselves Christian nationalists. And the question is, what on earth do they mean by that? Are they trying to say their nationalism contains and confines their Christianity? Well, if that's the case, then it's completely unchristian. Mm-hmm. That's what the example of Roman Christianity tells us and teaches us. Mm-hmm. So this self-identification as a Christian nationalist invites the criticism from the left, which then fills the self-identification with a meaning which is antithetical to Christianity itself. So you see the segue goes from nationalism to Christianity as the problem of politics, and therefore the rejection of Christianity for the sake of limiting the appeal to nationalism. It's a completely poisonous environment in which we found ourselves.
And we need to unpack that more coming up on the Public Square. This is so fascinating. Our guest, of course, is Dr. William B. Allen. Along with our panel here, we'll be hearing from everybody as we go along. You stay with us or listen online. If you joined us late, start at the beginning. Go online to thepublicsquare.com or use that smartphone app to listen to this whole program. Let's continue the conversation. Is Christian nationalism real? Dave Zanotti?
Okay, Doc. I have heard from so many people about this, and when I've said to them, Dr. Allen's coming in, they said, oh, good. Ask him this, ask him that. One of the things that they've been asking is, since none of us can seem to come up with what Christian nationalism is as it's being allegedly thrown at Christian people in general, I have to tell you that I struggle to understand what the people who are calling themselves Christian nationalists are saying and why they would use that term in any way, shape, or form. Let's say that we were all turning in our term papers and you were going to try to help us understand the right way to talk about this. Where would we start?
Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Interesting.
You may not have expected that.
No.
But consider, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. The allegiance is pledged to something abstract called the republic, of which the flag is merely the symbol. It is not pledging this particular society, but the principles upon which the society is founded. And as long as the society subsists, remains standing on those principles, the allegiance can be cashed in. It's a check. It's good. You can call people on the pledge. When the society is no longer faithful to the principle, the pledge does not protect the nation, the society, the politics, because it's the principles that are the object of the pledge. That means that real attachment to the fundamental principles, in particular to Christianity, will not support the nation when the nation wanders away from it.
So we've talked about the sacred truths that the founders walked through. They clearly were making a commitment to self-evident truth that was held in consensus. And I might remind everyone that the Declaration of Independence was a document of unanimous consent of the state, of the colonies coming together as one, and this was a unanimous declaration. It wasn't a close vote. Now there were arguments among the different delegations, but when it came time to make the separation, everyone was in. All right, so it's not something that was done in a corner. This was done in plain sight. So what I would like to do is let's rewind the tape. If you could instruct us, and look, I don't want to blame anybody else. Let's say you're instructing us at the round table, and we'll have a little meeting with one of our trustees right here. You can fix us in front of God and all these witnesses. How is it best to talk about this? Is it best to let these terms just fade away like the former criticisms of restructionism and theocracies and dominionists? Is this a construct of the left that we should just blow right past? Or how do we discuss this more effectively?
Well, just remember this. It seems to me important to observe that any of these conversations that serve no other purpose than the pursuit of power will be inconsistent with the foundations of this republic. Mm-hmm. Politics is not about power. Politics is about limiting power. That's why it's compatible with the life of a Christian people. It confines power, restrains power, so that power does not intrude upon or trample upon faith. That's what politics is for. That means, therefore, that people who are serious about preserving the political heritage will also be serious about preserving the limitations on power when it comes to the full expression and development of faith. They will not seek to limit people's expressions of faith. They will not deny the obvious reality that people making public decisions will make those decisions taking their faith into account, which is not the same thing as saying government will direct them in their faith. But it is to say people will direct their government on the basis of their faith. This, it seems to me, is the bottom line.
Well, but sir, with all due respect, those that we've been studying, the critics would say, but aren't you forgetting about the enshrined right of the separation of church and state that's in our Constitution?
No such enshrined right. No absolute separation of church and state. As I indicated, the purpose of politics is to limit power. That's why the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law. Let me bring this home to you more clearly. The first draft of the First Amendment said there shall be no national religion established. That was the language that was proposed. In the deliberations in Congress that adopted the Bill of Rights, quickly people came to see that that went too far because that assigned a power to government. Government could prevent the emergence of a national religion. And people said, but that's not our point. What if it develops spontaneously? Government has no right to repress it. And so they got rid of the statement, there shall be no national religion, and replaced it with the statement, Congress shall make no law. Power is limited. Faith is unlimited. That's the thing I want to leave you with if you ask for instruction. Power is limited. Faith is unlimited.
What's eating at me and listening to everything that Dr. Allen is saying and all of the discussion, there are mistakes being made from those who come from a Christian perspective. There are mistakes being made from those who come from a secular perspective. My mind and heart is stuck on Colossians 2:8, where we're instructed to not be taken captive by empty philosophies. The verse exactly says, see to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world, rather than on Christ. The one conversation I had with one of our staff members, Sherry, was that when they talk about separation of church and state, it almost seems like they're trying to make a distinction between a structure and another structure when the church itself is made up of the body of Christ. So every time someone's talking about the separation of church and state, they're talking about eliminating the influence of those who come from a Christ-centered perspective, because we are the church. We are not a building or a structure. They're talking about a people group. And so as a people group, we can't fall into the trap, as some on the Christian right are and some on the Christian left are. We have to bear and hold on to those first principles, understanding the nature of where we got the liberties that we have, that they are endowed by our Creator, not from the government.
Great, Melanie. Great. I can't pass this up. It's so important. What you've said points to the underlying fact that people who are using this terminology in these kinds of campaigns are pursuing power. They're not pursuing the works of faith. The church is not a corporation. The bride of Christ is not a corporation. And it is not a vehicle for the expression of power. And so it couldn't. Where's Rushdoony now? So I say what we have to understand is that we are not limited by the secular aspirations of people who are angling for power.
I'm going to break in. I hesitate to do so because our time requires a break here. I just got to say, Melanie, I think you win the award. I've never seen Dr. Allen give 2 thumbs up until he did today when you read from Colossians chapter 2. You get the 2 thumbs up award from Dr. William B. Allen here today. So I'll do that play-by-play on the radio here. All right, we're coming back on the Public Square in a moment. What a great conversation today. Again, if you joined us late, you got to start at the beginning at thepublicsquare.com. Well, this is one of those Public Square programs. It's not to be missed, and you should really share this program with others. There's been so much great content here today from our guests and from the panel, which we're going to hear more from as we go along. But thanks for listening, and thanks for your support of the American Policy Roundtable. Christian nationalism, is it real? And Dave, thanks for bringing this to our attention. Past few days we've been kicking this around, haven't we? And it's time to come to the studio and talk about it.
Wayne, there's simply not enough hours to be able to present each of the different theories that are now running around the nation on different media outlets with different authors with different books. I will again mention that it seems to be not exactly coincidental that these runarounds happened always around a major national election. And so I want to put a pin in this part of it because it does seem like maybe this is politics. But before we get there, I want to reset the table in that this began with a statement made in an interview with Heidi Przybyla of Politico on MSNBC. And when we asked her to appear and if we could ask her some questions, She simply sent us an article, and the article was titled "The Right Way to Cover the Intersection of Religion and Politics." And it begins with this: on matters of spiritual faith and the public square, not to be confused with the public square, two concepts are embedded deeply in American history and law. The Constitution protects freedom of worship. So too does it enshrine the separation of church and state. Now, I see this now all the time from one camp in this conversation, one side of the conversation, and I have to ask the question, doesn't the Constitution do more than simply protect the freedom of worship? And am I mistaken, or is that word worship a trap door that means something else? Dr. Allen, what do you think?
It is the case historically that people have used the freedom of worship as a way to limit the freedom of religion. Mm-hmm. And what they say is, we can't interfere with what you do in your building, in your worship practices. But once you leave the building, you belong to us. Mm-hmm. That's the argument they're making. And it's a false argument, because it's the freedom not just of worship, but of expression.
The free expression thereof.
Free expression thereof, precisely. And it is so important to understand that there is no principle in the name of which one can limit the claims of religious freedom. It's not a wall of separation between church and state in that sense. It is an absolute bar to the state having anything to do, any power of interference with the world of religious faith. But I will say, on principle's defense, and I will defend her, that she owes no one an apology. She's not slandering Christians in her attack. She is repulsing the claims of politicians using the label of Christianity in the pursuit of power. And we know in partisan disputes, there are all kinds of excessive, hyperbolic expressions that are going to be used on both sides. And she's just showing the familiar tendency of appealing to a rhetoric in a political context that has nothing to do with the substance that might be otherwise be discussed of religion itself. In other words, it's an irreligious, a-religious conversation. And for that reason, she owes no apology to either people who call themselves Christian nationalists or to true and proper Christians.
But that doesn't mean she's correct in what she says.
That's correct also.
Yeah. And she's entitled to her opinion.
Yeah, yes. And we are also, I guess, entitled to evaluate her opinion based upon, and here's our standard. Is it biblical? Is it historically accurate? Is it legally correct? Mm-hmm. But I agree with you, Dr. Allen. She doesn't owe us or I don't believe she owes anyone an apology. She has the right to her opinion in the marketplace. And I'll go a step farther. And the reason I will take this step is because I think everyone should know that I'm about to crest 40 years in this service of the American mission at the American Policy Roundtable. And in the first 10 years, I got thrown out of a lot of meetings. And it wasn't because I was attempting to lecture anybody, but it was because I was trying to ask questions. And the question that got me thrown out of more conservative meetings than anything else was when I would ask, why do Christian leaders in the field of public policy act like they are one more special interest minority group that is advocating for their piece of the pie and their puzzle, their part of the puzzle? How can we take something as vast as the philosophical treatise of the Declaration of Independence and all that it stands for in the light of history and reduce it to jingoism and rhetoric and slogans and then I would say one more thing. And how could we possibly attempt to reduce the revelation of truth through the Old and New Testaments, exemplified, manifest, made flesh in the person of Christ and his atoning sacrifice and his resurrection from the dead, who died once and for all people, and then all join one political party? How do you do that? At which point in time I was summarily shown the door time and time and time again. And I could put all the names in, and I have to tell you, I've been booted out by all the people who were famous from about 1980 till today.
That's a
because
badge
I
of
keep
honor.
asking that question. Well, I keep asking that question. I mean, Doc, heck, you're on our board of trustees. I'm on the board of trustees. Maybe we need a new CEO. I mean, why do I keep getting kicked out of places?
Well, maybe you're like, who was that comedian, Marx, who said, I don't want to join a club that wants me to be a member?
That would be Groucho, not Carl.
Yeah, Groucho,
yeah. I mean, why do we fall into, I would submit that it's a Romans 12, 1 and 2 problem. That because we don't know the true history of America, that we've fallen into the rhetorical history of America that's basically we were fed as kids and now we act just like it. I mean, are we conforming to the spirit of the age?
Well, it comes down to a fundamental question, doesn't it? And that is to say, when Christ tells us the kingdom of heaven is at hand and the kingdom of God has come, he wasn't saying the kingdom of God is the United States of America. But there are some people who seem to want to turn it into that. And then that goes back to the beginning of our conversation. The whole idea of trying to elevate our political institutions to the level of heaven itself and to separate ourselves, therefore, from God is itself a fundamental blasphemy. And we cannot ensure that this nation is going to last forever. And we cannot base our hopes upon this nation, upon the hopes that it will last forever. For we know that what will last forever has nothing to do with this or any other particular nation. Our hope must rest in Jesus Christ and his righteousness.
Amen.
Well, and that's where our hope must rest, but that I see some using that as an excuse not to be involved in the process at all. They say, well, God's in control, therefore I don't have to touch that, or I don't even have to dabble in that area of my life. It doesn't matter who serves in authority on this earth over my neighbor. If we truly love our neighbor, can we have that attitude?
Now I expect Melanie to speak, and I expect her to remind you of the epistle from James, and I expect her to remind you of the two greatest laws. The first, of course, is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and the second is to love your neighbor as yourself, which I always have to remind people to add those final two words, as yourself, because it defines the character of the love, not merely the fact that you're reaching out to others. That means that there is no such thing as withdrawing. There's no such thing as detaching and not caring. But the obligations that weigh upon us are the obligations that God imposes upon us and that have greater force than any obligations we derive from civil society.
Be doers of the word. All right, we are going to continue this conversation on the Public Square as you stay tuned. Some of you have to leave. If you do, that website's there along with the smartphone app to listen to the whole program, the Public Square. One final segment of the Public Square today with our very special guest, Dr. William B. Allen, and our panel here, our usual team, and we're very happy to have Dr. Allen with us today. This is, Dave, a great reminder of how important it is that we have Dr. Allen's voice, isn't it?
Well, we need all of the voices that we can possibly get, Dr. Allen being one of the anchor authors of the 7 authors of the American Mission Center Library. I cannot tell you how valuable his writings and his teachings have been to me personally and how deeply we treasure his friendship. And I think that everyone who listens feels the same way. They just want to hear more.
Yeah.
So, Doc, we're not going to be able to wrap this up. We're going to have to come back and talk more about this. It's a very big subject. I feel like there are things that Christian leaders have done wrong that have opened us up to criticisms in the way that we participate in the public process. I have a deep and abiding problem with the two-party system from a biblical perspective and a historical perspective from both what the book of Proverbs says and what Washington and Adams said. Now, I know that it is inevitable that we will organize in groups and that we'll have political parties. I get that. But the level to which we have now turned these parties into mechanisms of controlling power, as opposed to vehicles that increase our ability to serve, troubles me deeply. And when I see so many Christians who cannot separate political involvement from the Republican Party or the Democrat Party, it grieves my spirit. I think we're making a mistake.
Yeah, I can follow that, and I appreciate that you would have that sentiment. The political party is, in its essence and purest form, an expression of the right of association.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can all embrace that. People ought to be able to come together to pursue collective goals. And the political party allows them to pursue the collective goal of identifying worthy and talented leadership for the community. That's what parties should do. But parties cease to be mere private associations recommending worthy citizens when they become arms of the state, when they become vested with power legally to impose limiting conditions on who can be elected, who can get a name on the ballot, who can therefore campaign, and where and how they must campaign, all with the force of law, which is to say with a gun standing behind it.
Yep.
Then it is no longer a political party. Then it is a part of the state apparatus, and it's a police apparatus. And in that role, it is offensive to all that we believe. And it prevents us recurring to the strength of our tradition. To go back to the very beginning of your statement, what we're really concerned with is to ask ourselves always, what can we rely upon in order to assure that we can always have accessible to us the appeal to those principles beyond the government? And that's when we're reminded, I always start with George Washington, who said to us, in effect, keep alive in your breast that little spark of celestial fire called conscience. There is the kernel that flowers into every good fruit in this society or any society, if we only remember that what it expresses is our obligation to God. That is the beginning of everything.
Dr. Allen, at a recent church service, the pastor speaking read from Mark chapter 10, and I wonder if it in any way, I'd like to get your thoughts on if this in any way bears thought in how we think about this at all. Starting in verse 42. And calling them to himself, Jesus said to them, these are his disciples, you know that those who are recognized as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and that their great men exercise authority over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. So how are we to think about that as Christians in America in the public space?
Well, I think it's fairly straightforward, isn't it? I said we must remember that our obligation is to God. And how do we discover where that obligation is expressed in ways that we can understand? And this is one of the passages that will do so. It's expressed in terms of invoking our obligations to serve, and not to seek preeminence, but to, as it were, become the sheep that hear the voice of the good shepherd and know where and when to follow. So yes, I subscribe fully to the implication of what you've just shared with us from Mark 10, in the sense that those who said, Master, can I sit on your right hand or on your left hand, or who shall be first in the kingdom of heaven? The reminder is that's not the question. The question is, who shall say, here am I, send me, when the Lord calls?
Dr. Allen, much of the criticism about Christian involvement in civic life is a fear of compulsion, the idea that if Christians enter this debate from a position of transcendence, that they serve a living, transcendent God, then they're in God's name going to attempt to force other people to obey God.
Yeah.
I find that an impossible tenet in the entirety of the 66 books of the Scripture. I cannot find the God, the Creator referenced by the founders as a God of compulsion, nor can I find instruction where he attempts to compel others to force anyone to believe anything. Am I missing something?
No, not at all. It is very hard for someone who is focused on himself to get into the kingdom of heaven. This is a difficult road to go because he has a hard time putting off his concern with this world. And we know we have been summoned to die to this world. That's what it means to live in Christ, to die to this world. And that passage tells us how hard it is to die to this world. But that doesn't mean it should not be our aspiration. It is what Christ asks of us, and it is not compelled. Remember, he says, sell what you have, give it to the poor, and follow me, and watches the rich man walk away disconsolately. He doesn't put a chain around him and lead him, drag him behind him. He invites him to follow him, but he must do it on his own.
It seems like so many people want to say, well, just tell me, do I get involved in politics or not? What does God want me to do? It sort of sounds like the question Wilberforce had.
Yeah, but isn't that question really easy to answer? It says, when you're walking along and you see the wounded, help him.
When you find a need, fill it, right? Whatever that need happens to be in the world that you are in, which God owns.
That's it.
And he's given you a mission in this world. You're going to see needs all around the place.
And we have to separate out the noise. They're saying you're going to force your ideas, you're going to force your values, you're going to force your God on us. We have to drown that out. We have to separate that out because our obligation is to be who we are in Christ in the marketplace, in the public square, in the debates, at the table, helping to make decisions. That's why we need people elected who carry those principles with them in the decision-making process. It's not a matter of should I be involved. It's at what level can I be involved? What can I do? And we need to keep pushing ourselves into positions where we're helping to make those policies and those decisions.
Because it's still the consent of the governed at the end of the day anyway.
Exactly.
Well, but Doc, doesn't she sound like a Christian nationalist to you?
No, but she does sound to me that she believes that she has to carry out the Great Commission.
There you go.
And that you have to give witness wherever you are. You have to give witness, whatever the opportunity. You have to fill the need where you see it. That's what it sounds like to me.
This conversation clearly has to continue. We've just scratched the surface, and we will be back because there are many more people in this arena of attack and with a lot of opinions, and we're going to continue to sort it out, but we wanted to start right. So thank you, Dr. Allen, and we'll be calling you again soon.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
And as you've been listening today, I hope you've been thinking about who to share this conversation with. Give them the link, thepublicsquare.com.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.